Welcome to Explore This, the podcast where we take a peek into the hearts and minds of explorers everywhere and learn what it takes to dedicate your life towards creating a better planet. In our first season, we focus on African explorers and feature scientists, historians, ecologists, journalists, and other experts from across the continent. I am your host, Cornelius Okello.
And I'm your co-host, Gautam Shah.
Today's guest is Halima Abubakar, an artist, photographer, cultural activist, and archivist who's doing something deeply powerful with identity, memory, and heritage. Halima was born in northern Nigeria, but grew up across the south and the west, soaking in a mixture of cultures, traditions, and stories. Those layered experiences inform her work, particularly her Kwalia project, where she documents and celebrates the traditional tattoos of northern Nigeria, the ones that once told stories on skin but are now disappearing. Inspired by her grandmother's own intricate markings, Halima combines photography, research, video, and art to revive these symbols, not just as relics, but as living stories of ancestry and belonging.
I was really lucky to see her present her work a while back. And while her photographs were amazing, she doesn't do it alone. She works with communities, creates platforms of dialogue, and imagines future storytelling through immersive technology.
Welcome to the podcast, Halima. You are our first artist or archivist that we've interviewed in the show, and we are truly, truly honored to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Cornelius and Gautam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with where you grew up. So you were born in the north, but grew up in the south and partly in the west. Could you tell us a little bit more about how growing up in these diverse parts of Nigeria were for you?
Yeah, so I was born in northern Nigeria, Kano to be precise. And then my dad was in the military. He's a pilot. And because of his work, he, was moving, from place to place. And then he was in Rivers State, Port Harcourt, which is, southern part of Nigeria. And we were there for quite a number of years before we moved to Lagos, Nigeria. So growing up in, those places were very interesting, as in it was an interesting experience. And this is because I remember as a child or as a baby, when I started learning how to talk, we always visited, the northern part of Nigeria, every long vacation. And, I really understood English until I'd go back, to the north. And when I'm in the north, I try to learn Hausa and forget my English completely. So by the time I come back to Port Harcourt, I would now struggle to learn English again and then forget Hausa. But it was interesting because, somehow my parents tried to speak a lot of Hausa in the house, especially when we were, in the southern parts and the western parts of Nigeria. And that, I think, created some sort of balance, where it is that we're able to have, a good amount of Hausa and then, a very solid English. But most of it, I think I struggled with seeing people who were like me. I'd say people who were speaking like me. And, I remember being in secondary school and my friends would call me Malu. So Malu is supposed to be like how do I call it now? I don't want to call it an insult, but, Malu seems like, so Malu is cow, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, the northerners they have herds, right?
Yeah.
So they refer to the northerners as like Malu, right? So
Like men.
yeah, something like that. And then, interestingly, I think I kind of owned it because I'd call myself the Malu chick, that kind of thing. So I thought, my friends actually called me that as a nickname, and I really like kind of owned it. But later, I think I started to really think about it deeply, and it started to, inform my, understanding of how I was perceived or how the Northerners were perceived. And I also remember that we had, growing up in the West and the South, you see a lot of beggars like on the street, and those beggars were actually mostly Northerners in quotes. So I couldn't really understand why at the time. Like, I just really used to wonder why, like, why, you know? Because I know they spoke my language, you know, what I understand. Like, and there was just this crisis in my head, and I was thinking, why is this? But going to the north every year was also like an eye opener because, you know, I'd see family, I'd meet my cousins, you know, would have fun, you know, in very traditional ways. My grandmom used to play some musical instruments, she'd tell us stories. You know, it was just very like, I just was drawn to that. But, you know, like I said, there was this conflict of identity. When I'm here, I'm like, and then when I'm here, I'm, you know, so it was just me struggling. But I think over time, I kind of made a decision that I really wanted to understand where I was from and make sense out of the perception that, you know, that I receive or that I see in the southern part and the western part of Nigeria. And it made me curious. So I started to ask a lot of questions. And then I went back to Kano and I studied. So I went to university in Kano. And even though I studied mechanical engineering, I'm sure you know that. Yeah. I was really drawn to understanding my culture and my roots. So while I was studying mechanical engineering, I was very like into the community, trying to, you know, connect the dots and just find out what it really was about the Northerners. And I think that's, yeah, I'm still on that journey.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Only the North moved away completely, and now
Yeah.
almost as if you're trying to rediscover your roots, to learn about your roots. Very interesting.
Yes.
Where do you
Yeah.
live now?
So I live in Kaduna, Nigeria, and Kaduna is where I am from. I was born in Kano because my mom is from Kano, but my dad is from Zaria, Kaduna. So I live in Kaduna.
So you said you studied mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
Right now you're working as an artist, as a photographer, etc.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did you want to do when you were growing up?
I wanted to do so many things, I must be honest. So initially, because my dad was a pilot and I love the idea of traveling, I told my dad, I said I wanted to be a pilot. My dad said, no, you can't be a pilot. When you're a pilot, what happens when you get married? You know, what will happen to your children? And in my head, I'm thinking like, you know, it was interesting, but, you know, he kind of, you know, but I said to him that I still will get my PPL, that's my private pilot's license, even though he stops me. Yeah, I really intend to do that. In fact, I was saying it some days ago and I was like, my, you know, to do's and bucket list.
Nice.
So he started to convince me to become a doctor. In fact, I think he was even confused because he wanted me to be a doctor. At some point, he wanted me to be a quantity surveyor. At some point, he wanted me to be an architect. And I think I was confused as well. And I was like, you know what, anything that comes. But interestingly, what used to happen, I think, I don't know if it still happens now, but when you apply for a course, right, they can just decide to give you anything. So if I applied for medicine, and I think that perhaps I didn't meet the cutoff, you know, for medicine. And then next thing I just hear, will you do mechanical engineering? And I'm like, oh, well, I can. And that was how it happened. And then I just went ahead and, you know, studied mechanical engineering. I don't know if I enjoyed it. But I did it and, you know, I finished.
Now you're
and
here.
Yeah, now I'm here. For me, I just think it was perhaps maybe a rite of passage for me. Like, okay, you know, just do
Now
that.
I have a degree.
Yeah, I have a degree. But at the same time, if I want to be honest, I think that, you know, studying mechanical engineering was very interesting and very key because, you know, analytics, you know, I'm drawn to patterns, I'm drawn to lines, angles, I'm drawn to analysis, I'm drawn to design, you know, all of that. So I think, you know, it has perhaps it had its own bit of you know, impact in my life. Yeah.
I was just laughing because as you're talking, I'm recalling the path that my life took with my father. When I told him I wanted to be an architect, and he tells me, yeah, there's no money in that. So very similar to what your father was like, yeah, but what, you know, and then how interesting it is that our father's decisions or our father's advice
I
kind of
know.
influenced what we became. And then ending up doing degrees because this is what the university has called me for, therefore I'm going to do it. Not that I hate it, but it's it
I
is what it
know.
is.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in your story. Now you have a mechanical engineering degree. Between that and being a National Geographic explorer who's doing these amazing things with art and women. But I want to unpack it slowly. So I read a quote of yours, and actually you've kind of touched on it right now, saying that your grandmother's stories are that's what influenced the work you're currently doing. What are these stories she told you that perhaps have influenced the work you're doing right now?
Okay. So I would like to take you a little back and say to you that my dad actually introduced me to photography. And yes, and this is because, like I said, he's a pilot, and he used to travel, all the time, and he used to take a lot of pictures, and always when he comes back, he gifts me with a camera. So I did a lot of, work with analog cameras, film, cameras, and all of that until digital. So it was a long journey, I must say. And the journey started when I literally saw that my dad had a mark on his forehead, right? So, and then my granddad also had a mark. My dad has one, my granddad have because he's late now. And a number of my dad's siblings have marks and some don't. So I was just really curious, and I started to ask questions. And I said to my granddad, on one of those travels, back home to spend the holiday with my grandparents and family. So I started to ask my granddad questions about it. And my granddad would say to me, he would now start telling me about the Civil War and start telling me stories that I honestly wasn't interested in at the time. I just wanted him to tell me, why? Why are these marks, what do they mean and all of that? So my granddad just told me at the time that it was a means of identification, knowing your family and knowing, they didn't just want you to get missing. So they would just give you a mark, and then when you get missing and they find you, because of the war, they can bring you back home, that kind of thing. So that's what stuck in my head. But I was really curious because growing up in the southern parts and the western parts of Nigeria also triggered, that question, because I saw that the marks were quite different, right? And I just wanted to know more. And then somehow I had this very mischievous friend we go to what you call Islamia, that's the Arabic school. I think we were about 8 years old when her dad also has, the same mark. And she said to me that, do you know that, the marks that on our father's faces were made with a coin? I said, you're kidding me. And then we used to spend, coins those days, when you're going for, you have to buy maybe some snack or something. And then we literally used the coin and rubbed it on our forehead. And then by the time I got home, so it made a wound. If you look closely, you see actually that I have a slight mark. So when I got home, my mom saw it and she was like, what is this? And I said, that I was trying to make a mark similar to my dad's mark. And she was upset. And she literally spanked me. And I asked her why. Why? Like I was really curious. Like, but daddy has, my granddad has, so uncle and so aunt have. Why can't I have? And then she didn't answer me. And I think that's really, triggered, this. And I said, in the future, I'll definitely find this out. And that was how it started, even though it was, I'd say in my subconscious at the time, it was something that just passed. But I was just very curious, and I realized that I was literally drawn to people who have marks. So if you have a mark, you'd be my friend because I'll ask you about the mark, I'll ask you what it means. So that was what I was doing. And then when I finished university, I didn't pursue my mechanical engineering, career path. I just literally jumped into photography, and that was what I started to do. So I started documenting, I started asking questions, I started to travel across Nigeria, and I was documenting these marks. And the marks led me to meet the people who make the marks. So it was, I just kind of followed the process. And, I was just following and following, and I realized that these marks were categorized they fell into different categories. So we have the cultural ones, or rather the beautification marks, we have the spiritual marks, we have the medicinal marks, we have the ethnic marks, and we have the gilded marks, as the professional guilds marks. And, I felt it was quite cumbersome, and I thought to myself, how do I? But yeah, I had already started documenting all of these. All that I needed to do was just classify, okay, these were this was in this was in this. And I was doing that until I literally came into contact with the ones that were my grandmother. And it's an interesting story because my father, being her first son, had this very weird relationship with her because she never called his name since she had him until she died. So, yeah, and then unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know what to say at this point, it meant that that tradition was going to be passed on to us. So she didn't talk to me. She didn't talk to my siblings. So we literally felt like our grandmother didn't like us.
That's so weird.
So anytime we come all the way from Port Harcourt to Zaria, there was just this very cold reception. We have our cousins who are there, and you know when they come in and they're greeting her and they're talking to her, she's playing with them, she's talking to them. But we that were not here for God knows how long, she doesn't even look. She doesn't even look at us. So I told my dad at one point, and I said to him that I don't think your mom really likes us, and if she doesn't, it doesn't make sense for us to keep going, to Zaria.
Yeah.
But my dad was very uncomfortable, and he now tried to explain to me. He said, "Well, it's a culture that this, that," and I said to him, "Well, I mean, it shouldn't affect us, And then he tried to speak to her about it, and I mean, it's what she knows, so she never really changed. But I think at the time, I think after I got married, she kind of loosened up a bit with me, and I was going back a lot more often to Zaria because I had moved back up north. So somehow, I started to gain this, access to her, I'd call it.
Yeah.
And then I literally came into contact with the marks, and I was like, what? Because she was fully adorned, her arms, her neck. And I asked her, I said, what are these? And then she looked at me and she said, Kwalia. So that's where the name came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Kwalia? She was like, yes. And I said, tell me about it. At what age? And then she started to tell me the stories. And she said, we were just young girls, curious, and they were just adorning themselves. They'll go. So and she was shy, actually, that she didn't really go into so much details. I probably got all of this from other people, not her directly. So, but then I just started to document her. So I documented her marks. I documented so I was asking her, okay, so what does this mean? Do they have meanings? And she said to me, no, that there are no meanings. But it didn't really add up because in my head I'm like, so,
You just
I was just
your
yeah. And it was interesting because I mean they were in very interesting patterns. It wasn't random. You know how it wasn't abstract. I'll put it that way. They were should I say coordinated? And then I started to ask her for there was one on this part of her arm, and I started to look for it so she would hide it. Yeah, so she was really hiding that one, and I thought to myself, there has to be something about that. So one of my aunts held her tight, and then we looked at it carefully, and then to my surprise, I saw that it was her name and my granddad's name in Arabic.
Oh, okay.
And when I saw that, I was like, oh wow. Then I said to her, "Did you do this before you got married?" And then she didn't answer me. She just laughed. And I was like, oh, that's a love story there,
Oh.
So afterwards, I just thought the other ones must have meanings one way or another. And what I did was I decided to, replicate them drawing by hand. And I was able to, start researching online to see if there were certain, marks that were similar to those, around the world. And then I actually found quite a number of them similar to the Adinkra marks in Ghana, the Uli in the southern part of Nigeria, the Berber from Morocco.
When you decided not to continue with your mechanical engineering career and decided to focus on this cultural aspect of documenting the markings and the tattoos, etc., how did your family react?
So, it was interesting because when I said to my dad, okay, now I'm done. I need to, do my photography. And he said, what? Are you joking? I said, no, I'm not. And he was like, how can you study mechanical engineering and say you want to do photography? I said, well, that's what I want to do, really, and he didn't understand it. But I think I decided to, make my point clear because after university, you had this compulsory 1 year National Youth Service Corps that we do in Nigeria. And at the time, they had just increased the allowance from 9,900 to 19,800 naira. So what I did was I decided to save up all of that money and only survive on the allowance I was getting from the office where I was working. So usually they post you to certain offices. I was posted to General Electric, but somehow I was rejected because they had a number they wanted to take, and I think I didn't go on time, which I always see as a blessing. And then I then told my uncle. My uncle is an accountant, and I said to him, "What do I do at this point?" He said, "Just come and do accounting, do ICANN, which is one of the professional certificates for Nigerian accountants." And I said to him, "No, after doing mechanical engineering that I really don't. And he said to me, "So, do you want to do photography?" So he actually like prompted it, and it was just an aha moment for me. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he was like, "You can use my office, to build yourself." And, they were paying 15,000 naira at the time for, the monthly allowance, which they paid coppers. And I was happy to do it. So I was happy to use that to like survive on that and then save my 19,800, for the entire year. And then I got a camera off an older photographer. I think it was his first camera. It was a Canon 40D. I still have it. And then that same year, this was 2012, I had my first exhibition. So I was part of a group exhibition. And my parents thought, okay, this girl means business. At that time, I started to get some support from them. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So no, ever when you set up you set your mind to pursue photography, there was never any doubt in your mind.
No. I just knew that,
Wow.
I just knew that, it was going to be an interesting journey. I just believed in the journey and believed in the process, and I knew that I was going to just, find myself.
Amazing.
So, Halima, I was lucky enough to see a sneak preview of the documentary you created and, of all the people that you interviewed and trying to get their stories. And it seemed that the women you interviewed, I think it was mainly women, they were laughing a lot as they recalled their experience, which I remember, it was somewhat surprising for me. But how difficult was it for you to get them to open up?
It was actually a challenge, a big challenge. And I'll say this because of the conservative nature of, people from the North, especially women. I had to, negotiate my space. And that meant that I needed to spend some, good quality time with them. So I'd visit them, I went to them initially, introduced myself, and I told them this was what I was working on. And, because they were most of the people, I was referred to them by other people, that I previously had spoken to about, the project, or I was just lucky enough to probably meet somebody who knew them. So it was usually based on referrals. But at the same time, they were very cold initially. But, when I noticed or I realized that, I tried as much as possible to negotiate my space, and that meant building trust. So I would go visit them, I'd call them, I'd take gifts to them. I just really built a relationship with each and every one of them. And I must say that I was blessed to be able to have the wisdom, to be able to, and the patience, to follow through. And we had several meetings. So before those clips, we've had series of conversations, which I didn't literally go with my camera because I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable. So it got to a point where they got comfortable with me, that when the camera was there, they didn't really pay attention to the camera. So it was just very seamless at that time. But I remember going to Lapai, which is somewhere in Niger State, where I got, even with the men, that was really hectic because we had been talking for almost 4 or 5 months, and we had agreed and set a time to travel, and traveling to them was almost about 11 hours, and then by road. And then after getting there, they just said to me that they don't even know what I'm talking about.
Oh wow. Really?
Really? I was taken aback, and, leaving home and going all the way prepared, they just said, no, they don't even know, they don't know what's up. And I had a fixer, who was there, and they denied him. They said they don't even know him,
So you had to go back home.
No, I didn't. We stayed we stayed longer than time because we had like a time frame that we needed to spend in that city. But because of that, we had to spend longer, and it meant we had to. In fact, it got to a point that when we wake up in the morning and we're heading to them, we go to the bakery and get some bread, and take to them just to also negotiate, space, physically. Because
Yeah.
initially, we're talking over the phone, the fixer was there physically, but them seeing us made it look, very weird. And at the same time, they were also worried about their, should I say, safety. And I also think that people used to actually take advantage of them. So they were very wary, and they said to me that I needed to, build some structure, that they don't have water, they need light and all of that. And I need to do that for them before they can give me any audience. So I said to them that I'm also a citizen like them, and I also need, So it had to do with a lot of convincing. I tried to convince them and try to make them see that, okay, I'm here just so that we can, take these stories, preserve them, not for us, but for you and for your children, and for future generations. And it actually took a while, but I think it was worth it, because afterwards, I was supposed to go back. I promised I was going to go back, but I wasn't able to. But I sent them pictures and some gifts, and, they called and they were very happy. I still have their numbers, and, once in a while we communicate. So, yeah.
All's well
I
that
think
ends
it's
well.
I think it's so good to hear these type of stories, because I think, for those of us on the receiving end of the documentary or the photographs or something, we see the final product. But and we can imagine that actual moment that you took the photograph, or that actual moment where you filmed it, but we have no idea everything that it took to even be able to get to the point where you could even have that conversation, or you could even
Exactly.
get to the position of being able to film it. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Exactly.
Thank you, Yakam, for the
Yeah.
question.
I mean, your process sounds very, very immersive. And I'm sure as you've described, there's a roller coaster of emotions from starting from the beginning to the final payoff. So how do you deal with some of these letdowns or some of these emotions that bog you down?
So I usually go with an open mind, because I know the conservative nature of these people, and I also respect it, because in the end, it's what they want, right? I want to tell the stories, but they don't want the stories to be told. And let me even share a very interesting story. So with one of my great grand aunts, after documenting my grandma, my grandma passed in December of 2020. And then I went ahead and started to document her aunts. And when I did that, I had an exhibition sometime in November of 2022, somewhere in Lagos. And, it went live, on the TV and, media and all of that. And my, one of her own great granddaughter came in contact with it on Instagram, and they decided to troll me. Yeah. So it was a very dicey situation, because at the time, we have very big families, right? So they don't know me. They probably don't even know my dad, but I had already built a very strong relationship with my grandmother's aunts, with all of them. So they gave me consent, to go ahead, and they would say to me, they are old. You need to, if you don't tell these stories, who will tell them? And they probably don't even have people in their families who are actually, telling these stories. Now I do that, and then they reach out to me, and they say that they want to meet me, they want to have a meeting with me, they're going to, in fact, they were thinking of suing me, and all of those things. And it was a big issue in the family. And then one of them reached out to me and had a conversation with me and said they don't want their mother's picture online, and I needed to take it down and all of that. And I said, okay, yeah. And I said, okay, that's fine, I'll take it down. But I also need to let you know that she actually gave me consent, but I respect your view. So I did take the particular picture down. But what was interesting? She passed earlier this year, and they started to thank me for documenting their mom. and they said to me, thank you for documenting, thank you for, keeping the story alive, because it wasn't just about, the pictures, it was even about the stories she shared. So the point I'm trying to make is, you really have to understand, all the challenges, and be patient and literally have an open mind, because I was hurt at the time, but at the same time I said to myself, you know what, it's very understandable. They weren't there, they didn't understand the circumstances, they don't live with her. I've gone over time and I've built like a very strong relationship with these people, and they have given me consent. But obviously she probably wouldn't say, so person came and I gave the person consent, because for them it's not really a thing. But then
Yeah.
just waking up one day and seeing your mother's face, or your grandmother or great grandmother's face on the media, and you're like, why? Who is this? Who
Yeah.
has the audacity? That kind of thing.
Your story about your relatives is actually a very good segue to something I wanted to ask. So there's a take of what you are trying to do with these stories. You're trying to tell the stories of these markings, and then you've given a very interesting dimension of how the people related to them would perceive this story. How do you want people who are not involved in the story, someone like Gautam or myself, who are not from Nigeria, who've never been to Nigeria, but are consuming this content? How do you want us to feel, or what message you're trying to get to us?
Okay, so basically, I always say that my projects are usually like a point of call to inspire people to literally go back and think about their own personal stories, or, things that are very important to them, and see the essence or the need to document and preserve them. So for you, Cornelius or Gotham, it's interesting to share that I would love for you, to do in your own little bit. Try to perhaps think about something about your family. It could be a recipe, it could be, your grandmother's, fabric, it could be anything, but something interesting and something that that you have experienced, but you can literally see that your children might not experience it. So find it in your own little way to see how you can document, to preserve it so that others can carry it, on. See what I mean?
Yeah, amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's made me think about a lot of things. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Halima, I want to take us down a little bit of a different path now. In the short time that we've spent together, you've asked me a lot about my family and my daughter, and every time we send a WhatsApp, you're always asking me, how is Anna and how is me, and it's always very touching to me. And so I can tell that family is very important to you. Could you tell us a little bit more about your family, in particular your two boys?
Yeah, so I'm the first child of my parents, and I have four younger siblings. And then I have my husband, who is a very big, fan of mine, and, a big supporter. He's my backbone, I'd say, because I mean, every year he would literally ask me any plans for any travels so that I can take my leave, so I can be with the boys. So that's, I'm really grateful. And I believe that I'm blessed, to have someone like that, who is always looking out for, my progress, and is always pushing me and saying to me, I think you can do more. I think you're not doing enough. And yes, I have two beautiful boys, Nabil and Khalil. Nabil is 9, Khalil is 4. And I mean, they rock my world. Yeah, so I'm blessed to have them. And Nabil is an artist. Well, he draws. He can, he's very, very, very creative. In school, he always gets the, most creative prize. And Khalil is very curious and analytic. He's 4, but how he moves and things he does are very, like, he's very meticulous, I'd say. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
So yeah.
Do your boys understand what the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so interestingly, I carry them along. Now, if Khalil, so when I'm going through my phone and something pops up, perhaps maybe a picture from maybe my exam, he say, Mama, that's Kwalia. because I had an exhibition last year in May of 2024, and they were part and parcel of it. So they were at the exhibition, and because they understand that Mama needs to be away for a bit, I'm going to work. So when I come back, I share the stories, I show them the videos, all the work that I do, especially the documentaries. I make sure they watch them, and sometimes they even say along with me when I'm talking. Perhaps it's a voiceover or something. So they're really part and parcel of the work that I do.
Speaking of kids, if you were to meet your younger self, what advice would you give her?
Okay, I don't know if there will be any advice, per se. And the reason is that I think I'm actually doing what I wanted to do. I don't know what I'll say, but I'll just say I'm proud of you. Like, I'm proud of who you'll become, or who you'll become. Because looking back, I think that I just wanted to have an adventure, and I think I'm having it at the moment.
We have a tradition here in our podcast when we are closing. We like our guests to give a toast. So I'm going to invite you now to give a toast to anything. So think about it, and then I will cue you and say, here's to, and then you complete. Okay? Give me a thumbs up when you're ready.
Okay, so let me think about it. Okay.
Halima, here's to.
Preserving history, one story at a time.
Lovely. Gautam, I think this is the shortest toast we've had so far on this podcast. Everybody gives
short and sweet.
Yes, everybody gives toasts like they're giving an Oscar acceptance award, but yours was short and sweet. Preserving history one story at a time. Halima, thank you very much for spending time with us. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having. Thank you so much, Cornelius and Gotham, for having me. I really appreciate this, and it has brought a lot of emotions, and I really had a good time. I had a good laugh, and I'd say thank you for giving me space to have a pastime.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.
That's it for this episode of Explore This. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep exploring.